The sun cast a golden hue over the horizon as Michael loaded the last of his belongings into the trunk of his old sedan. The cool morning air was tinged with the scent of pine and damp earth, a fragrance he'd come to associate with the small town of Evergreen. Nestled deep within a mountain valley, Evergreen was the kind of place people stumbled upon rather than sought out. Its charm lay in its simplicity. A single main street lined with mom-and-pop shops, a diner that doubled as the town's social hub, and a population that hadn't changed much in decades. Michael took a moment to glance back at the modest cottage he'd rented for the past 6 months. The white paint was peeling, and the garden was overgrown with wildflowers and weeds, a stark contrast to the meticulously maintained lawns of his neighbors. He'd moved here seeking solitude after a messy divorce and the subsequent fallout at his job as a journalist in the city. Evergreen had offered anonymity and a chance to reset. But now, the walls of the small town felt like they were closing in, and the whispers of the townsfolk had become too loud to ignore. He slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered before roaring to life, a reassuring sound that broke the morning silence. As he pulled away from the cottage, he noticed Mrs. Thompson peering at him through her lace curtains. Her eyes met his, and she offered a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. Michael nodded politely and accelerated down Maple Drive, eager to put distance between himself and the suffocating familiarity of Evergreen. The plan was simple. Drive east until he hit the interstate, then keep going until the mountains were a distant memory. He'd start fresh somewhere new, maybe even revisit his passion for writing, this time on his own terms. The road out of town was a winding stretch flanked by towering evergreens that seemed to touch the sky. As he navigated the curves, he turned on the radio, but only static greeted him. He flipped through the stations, but all were the same. "Must be the mountains," he muttered, resigning himself to silence. After about 20 minutes, he approached a fork in the road. The left path was marked by an old wooden sign that read "Evergreen 5 miles," pointing back the way he'd come. The right path had no sign, but he was certain it led to the interstate. He took the right, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. The trees here were denser, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the asphalt. The further he drove, the narrower the road became. Asphalt turned to gravel and gravel to dirt. Michael frowned. He didn't remember the road being this rough when he'd first arrived. But then again, he'd been guided by a GPS that now displayed no signal. He continued for another half hour, the road deteriorating with each mile. An uneasy feeling settled in his stomach. He should have reached the interstate by now. Up ahead, he saw a small clearing and decided to stop to consult a map he kept in the glove compartment. Pulling over, he unfolded the worn map across the hood of his car. Tracing his finger along the roads, he tried to pinpoint his location, but nothing matched the route he'd taken. Frustrated, he folded the map and leaned against the car, gazing into the forest. A rustling sound caught his attention. He turned toward the noise but saw only the swaying branches. Probably just an animal, he thought. The forest was full of wildlife. Deciding he'd gone the wrong way, Michael got back into the car and turned around. He'd head back to the fork and take the other road, even if it meant passing through Evergreen one last time. As he retraced his path, the surroundings seemed different. The trees looked older, their trunks thicker. The road, which had been dirt, was now a narrow path overgrown with grass and weeds. Panic began to creep in. He checked his phone again, still no signal. He drove for what felt like an hour, but the road didn't improve. Eventually, the path became too narrow for the car to pass. With no other option, he parked on the side and decided to proceed on foot, hoping to find someone who could give him directions. He grabbed his backpack, stuffed the map and a bottle of water inside, and locked the car. As he walked, the forest seemed to grow denser. The canopy above blocked out much of the sunlight, casting everything in a perpetual twilight. After walking for miles, he came across a small, weathered sign partially hidden by foliage. Wiping away the leaves, he read the faded words, "Evergreen 2 miles." Below it, an arrow pointed straight ahead. "That can't be right," he murmured. He'd been heading away from town. Confused but lacking alternatives, he followed the direction indicated. The path led him to a clearing where the town of Evergreen lay sprawled before him. Michael's heart raced. Had he somehow walked in a circle? But that was impossible. He entered the town, which was eerily quiet. The usual sounds, children playing, dogs barking, the distant hum of conversation, were absent. As he walked down Main Street, he noticed the shops were closed, their windows dark. The diner, typically bustling, was empty. "Hello?" he called out. His voice echoed off the buildings. From the corner of his eye, he saw a curtain twitch in an upstairs window of the general store. "Is anyone there?" he shouted. A figure appeared at the window, a young girl with pale skin and dark hair. She looked at him with wide eyes before disappearing behind the curtain. Unnerved, Michael decided to head to the sheriff's office at the end of the street. Sheriff Connolly was a stoic man but always seemed reasonable. The door to the office was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale, and a thin layer of dust covered the furniture. "Sheriff," Michael called out. No response. He walked further inside, past empty desks and silent radios. On the sheriff's desk lay an open ledger. Curiosity getting the better of him, he glanced at the entries. They all bore the same date, a date from over 50 years ago. A noise from the back room made him jump. "Sheriff Connolly?" he said, moving toward the sound. He pushed open the door to find an empty holding cell. The cot was unmade, and a set of keys hung from a hook on the wall. Suddenly, the cell door slammed shut behind him. He spun around, but no one was there. Panic surged as he tried to open the door, but it was locked tight. "Let me out!" he shouted, his voice cracking. Footsteps echoed from the main office, slow and deliberate. Michael's heart pounded in his chest. A shadow appeared on the wall, growing larger as the footsteps approached. The figure of an old man stepped into view. He wore a deputy's uniform, but one that looked outdated. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken. "Help me, please. I'm stuck," Michael pleaded. The man regarded him silently before speaking in a raspy voice. "You shouldn't have come back." "What do you mean?" The door locked on its own. "I was just looking for help." The old man shook his head slowly. "Once you're here, there's no leaving." A chill ran down Michael's spine. "I don't understand." The deputy turned away. "Best make yourself comfortable," he said as he walked out of sight. "Wait, come back," Michael yelled, but the only response was the fading echo of footsteps. Desperation took over. He searched the small cell for anything that could help. A loose bar, a tool, anything, but found nothing. Hours seemed to pass as he grappled with his situation. Just when hopelessness threatened to consume him, the cell door swung open. Standing there was the young girl he'd seen earlier. "You can go now," she said softly. Michael didn't question it. He rushed out of the cell, pausing to look at her. "Thank you. What's going on here?" She looked at him with sad eyes. You can't leave. I've heard that already. What does it mean? She turned and walked away, her figure fading until she seemed to dissolve into the shadows. Fear mixed with frustration, Michael decided to head back to his car. If he could just get back on the road, maybe things would return to normal. Exiting the sheriff's office, he found Main Street bustling with activity. People walked about, chatting and laughing as if nothing was amiss. The sudden change was jarring. He approached Mrs. Thompson, who was arranging flowers outside her shop. Mrs. Thompson, she looked up and smiled warmly. Michael, back so soon? I thought you'd left town. I tried, but I ended up back here. Something strange is happening. Her smile faltered. Oh dear, you look like you've seen a ghost. I can't leave, Mrs. Thompson. The roads lead me back here. Buildings lock me inside, and people disappear into thin air. She reached out and patted his arm. Maybe it's a sign you belong here. What are you talking about? Before she could answer, the bell of the town hall rang loudly, drawing everyone's attention. The townsfolk began moving toward the square. Come along, Mrs. Thompson said. The meeting is about to start. What meeting? You'll see, she replied, her tone cheerful but her eyes devoid of emotion. Feeling like he had no choice, Michael followed the crowd to the town square. A makeshift stage had been set up, and Sheriff Connolly stood at the center. He addressed the crowd. Welcome, everyone. Today, we gather to welcome back a familiar face. The crowd parted, and all eyes turned to Michael. A spotlight seemed to shine solely on him, though he couldn't see its source. Michael has returned to us, the sheriff continued. Let us make him feel at home. Applause erupted, echoing unnaturally off the surrounding buildings. Michael's skin crawled. He backed away slowly. This isn't right, he whispered to himself. Turning on his heel, he broke into a run. The faces of the townspeople blurred past him, some concerned, others smiling eerily. He ran until his lungs burned, finding himself at the edge of town near his cottage. His car was parked outside, just as he'd left it. Fumbling with the keys, he got into the car and started the engine. Without looking back, he sped down the road. The scenery flew by in a haze until he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The same fork in the road he'd encountered earlier. He took the other path this time, but after several minutes, he was back at the fork again. No, 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 he shouted, gripping the steering wheel tightly. He tried the path 3 more times, each with the same result. Defeated, he stopped the car in the middle of the road. The silence was oppressive. A knock on his window startled him. He looked up to see the old deputy staring at him. Lost? The deputy asked. What do you want from me? Michael demanded. It's not about what we want. It's about what you need. I need to get out of here. The deputy sighed. You can't leave until you've faced it. Faced what? Yourself. Before Michael could respond, the deputy vanished, leaving behind a swirl of mist. Heart pounding, Michael closed his eyes and took deep breaths. This isn't real. It's all in my head. He opened his eyes to find himself sitting in a dimly lit room, not in his car. The walls were bare, and a single light bulb hung from the ceiling. Hello? He called out. A door appeared in front of him. With no other options, he opened it. He stepped into a hallway lined with mirrors. As he walked, his reflections warped and twisted, showing versions of himself at different ages. Happy, sad, angry, broken. Voices echoed around him. You ran away. You couldn't face the truth. It's your fault. He covered his ears. Stop it. The voices grew louder. You can't escape yourself. At the end of the hallway stood a figure, himself, but with eyes black as night. You have to accept what you've done, the figure said. Michael shook his head. I didn't do anything. The figure stepped closer. Denial won't free you. Free me from what? From this place. Where am I? You're trapped in the moment you refuse to acknowledge. Memories flooded back, arguing with his ex-wife, the stormy night he left the city, the truck that appeared out of nowhere on the slick road. A sinking feeling settled in his gut. Am I dead? The figure nodded slowly. Only by accepting it can you move on. Tears welled in Michael's eyes. I didn't want this. None of us do. What's next? The figure extended a hand. That's up to you. Michael hesitated before reaching out. As their hands touched, the hallway dissolved into a bright light. He found himself standing in a peaceful meadow under a clear blue sky. The weight he'd been carrying was gone. Behind him, he heard familiar laughter. Turning, he saw his father, who had passed away years ago, waving at him. Welcome home, son, his father said warmly. Michael smiled for the first time in what felt like an eternity. I'm home. Michael awoke with a start, his heart pounding and his breath shallow. The meadow, serene and beautiful, had vanished in an instant, replaced by the dimly lit room he had been in moments before. He sat up, disoriented, the remnants of his peaceful vision fading like a half-remembered dream. The room was bare, save for a single wooden chair in the center and a small table beside it. On the table lay a folded piece of paper. Cautiously, he approached the table and picked up the paper, unfolding it to reveal a handwritten note. Asterisk, every story has more than one ending. Choose yours wisely. Asterisk, confusion clouded his mind. Was this a message? A warning? He glanced around the room, searching for any clues about his predicament. The door he had entered through was gone, replaced by a solid wall of unadorned wood. Panic began to rise again, but he forced himself to stay calm. He needed to think clearly. Michael took a deep breath and tried to recall the events that had led him here. The town of Evergreen, the inexplicable loop preventing him from leaving, the eerie silence, and the unsettling interactions with its residents. He had believed it was a psychological trap, perhaps a manifestation of his own guilt and unresolved issues from his past. But now, with this mysterious note, the situation felt more complex, more deliberate. He examined the room more closely. The chair was old, its wood worn smooth from years of use. The table was the same, sturdy and plain. There were no windows, no signs of life outside. It felt like a void, a blank slate where time and space had no meaning. Michael wondered if he was dreaming, trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't awaken. As he pondered his next move, a soft click echoed through the room. Michael turned sharply toward the sound, his eyes scanning the walls for any hidden mechanisms. A moment later, a section of the wall slid open silently, revealing a narrow corridor lit by faint, flickering lights. Without hesitation, he stepped into the corridor, driven by a mix of fear and determination. The corridor was long and narrow, lined with doors on either side. Each door was identical, made of the same unremarkable wood as the walls. Michael approached the first door on his left and placed his hand on the knob. It was cold to the touch, sending a shiver down his spine. He hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open. Inside was a small library, shelves filled with dusty books stretching from floor to ceiling. A single lamp cast a dim glow over a reading nook in the corner. Michael walked over and ran his fingers along the spines of the books, searching for anything that might provide answers. He pulled out a volume titled Evergreen, History and Mysteries, and began to skim through it. The book chronicled the founding of Evergreen, a town established over a century ago by settlers seeking refuge from the outside world. It spoke of the town's isolation, its self-sustaining community, and a series of unexplained disappearances that had occurred intermittently throughout its history. Each disappearance was marked by an event known as the Return, where individuals who had left the town were said to come back, often changed or unsettled. Michael's fingers paused on a passage that described a local legend about a hidden chamber beneath the town hall, rumored to hold secrets that the townsfolk were desperate to keep hidden. According to the account, the chamber was protected by a series of puzzles and traps, ensuring that only those deemed worthy could uncover its mysteries. A chill ran down Michael's spine. Could this chamber be connected to his own entrapment in Evergreen? He made a mental note to investigate further and returned the book to its place on the shelf. As he turned to leave the library, he noticed a photograph on the table. It was a black and white image of Evergreen from decades past, showing a vibrant community gathering in front of the town hall. In the center stood a man who looked strikingly similar to the deputy he had encountered earlier. Intrigued, Michael took the photograph and examined it closely. The deputy's stern expression seemed out of place in the cheerful setting of the photo. He wondered if there was a connection between the past and his current predicament. Clutching the photograph, he exited the library and continued down the corridor, reaching the second door on his left. This time, the room was a study, filled with maps and charts pinned to the walls. A large desk sat against one side, cluttered with papers and old photographs. Michael approached the desk and sifted through the documents, finding notes on the town's geography, weather patterns, and references to the hidden chamber mentioned in the library. One particular map caught his eye. It detailed the layout of Evergreen with a marked location beneath the town hall. A red circle highlighted a specific area, labeled Chamber Entrance. Michael felt a surge of determination. If the chamber held the key to escaping Evergreen, he needed to find it. He exited the study and continued exploring the corridor, taking note of the other rooms he passed. Each seemed to offer a glimpse into the town's history and the lives of its inhabitants. As he reached the third door on his left, he found himself in a room that resembled a bedroom, complete with a bed, a wardrobe, and personal belongings. It was unsettling to see a space so intimate and private, yet eerily empty. Michael decided it was time to head back and plan his next move. As he retraced his steps to the original room, he noticed that the corridor had changed. The doors he had passed earlier were now closed, and new ones had appeared. Anxiety gnawed at him as he realized that the layout of this place was shifting, preventing him from finding a clear path out. Determined not to give up, he focused on the information he had gathered. The hidden chamber beneath the town hall seemed to be his only lead. He needed to find a way to access it. Perhaps the town hall itself was located within this labyrinthine structure. Navigating the ever-changing corridor proved challenging. Doors appeared and disappeared, leading him in circles. Just when he felt he might lose hope, he spotted a door with a sign that read Town Hall above it. His heart raced as he approached, hoping this was the breakthrough he needed. Inside the town hall, the atmosphere was thick with history. The room was spacious, adorned with wooden beams and antique furnishings. A large fireplace dominated one end, and portraits of past mayors lined the walls. Michael searched the room for any indication of a hidden entrance to the chamber. He approached the fireplace, examining its structure for irregularities. Noticing a slight gap between the bricks, he pressed against it, feeling for any movement. To his surprise, a section of the wall swung open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Taking a deep breath, Michael grabbed a flashlight from a nearby shelf and began his descent. The stairs led to a stone corridor, damp and cold. The air grew thick with the scent of earth and something metallic. At the end of the corridor stood a heavy wooden door, similar to those he had encountered earlier. This door was adorned with intricate carvings depicting scenes of the town's founding and mysterious symbols that he couldn't decipher. He reached out and pushed the door open, revealing a large underground chamber. The room was illuminated by flickering torches set into the walls, casting long shadows that danced across the stone floor. In the center stood a stone pedestal with an open book resting upon it. The same title he had found earlier, Evergreen, History and Mysteries. As Michael approached the pedestal, he felt a presence behind him. He turned swiftly, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, only to find the room empty. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drip of water echoing through the chamber. He approached the book, flipping through its pages. The entries were more detailed than those in the library. They described rituals performed by the town's founders, meant to preserve the community and protect it from external threats. One passage caught his eye. The binding ritual must be renewed every 50 years to ensure the town remains untouched by the outside world. Failure to perform the ceremony results in the town reclaiming those who seek to leave. Michael's mind raced. Could this ritual be the reason he was trapped? If so, was there a way to reverse it? As he pondered, he heard footsteps approaching from the corridor above. He quickly closed the book and hid behind the pedestal, holding his breath as the door swung open. Sheriff Connolly stood there, his expression unreadable. "Finally," the sheriff said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "You've made it." Michael stepped out from his hiding spot, flashlight steady despite his fear. "What is this place? Why can't I leave Evergreen?" The sheriff sighed, moving closer. Evergreen is more than just a town. It's a sanctuary, a place where the outside world cannot intrude. The binding ritual ensures that those who enter cannot leave unless they fulfill their purpose here. Michael shook his head, struggling to comprehend. "But why me? What purpose do I have here?" The sheriff's gaze softened. "You were brought here for a reason. Evergreen chooses who stays and who leaves based on what they need to resolve within themselves. For you, it's closure." Michael's mind flashed back to his messy divorce, his tumultuous career, the truck accident that had changed everything. "I've tried to move on," he whispered, "but I can't." The sheriff gestured toward the pedestal. "The ritual must be completed. You need to confront your past, face your regrets, and find peace within yourself. Only then can you break free." Michael approached the pedestal, the weight of his situation settling heavily upon him. He opened the book, reading the instructions for the ritual. It required a symbolic act of letting go, something deeply personal that would signify his acceptance and readiness to move forward. Taking a deep breath, Michael closed his eyes and allowed his memories to flood back. He thought of the arguments, the sleepless nights, the loss of his job, and the pain of separation from his ex-wife. He realized that his inability to forgive himself had kept him tethered to Evergreen. With newfound determination, He picked up a small, smooth stone from the pedestal and held it tightly. "I forgive myself," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "I let go of the past and embrace the future." As the words left his lips, a warm light enveloped him, emanating from the book and spreading throughout the chamber. The symbols on the door began to glow, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. He felt a sense of release, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The sheriff watched silently, a hint of a smile on his face. "You've done well, Michael. Evergreen is free to let you go." The chamber around him began to dissolve, the stone walls fading into mist. Michael felt himself being lifted, the sensation both exhilarating and terrifying. When the light subsided, he found himself standing outside his rented cottage in Evergreen, the morning sun shining brightly in the sky. He glanced around, noting the vibrant colors of the town, the sounds of life returning to the streets. It was as if Evergreen had shed its mysterious veil, revealing itself as a quaint, welcoming community once more. Michael walked to his car, feeling lighter than he had in years. He unlocked the door, sat down, and turned the key. The engine started smoothly, the radio now filled with clear music instead of static. He took one last look at the cottage, a sense of gratitude washing over him. As he drove away from Evergreen, the road seemed to stretch infinitely ahead, unobstructed by the strange loops and barriers that had once held him captive. The town gradually faded into the distance, its secrets finally laid to rest. Michael glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing the town nestled peacefully among the trees. He smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile, knowing that he had finally found the closure he so desperately needed. The journey had been harrowing, but it had led him to a place of understanding and peace. As the sun set on the horizon, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had escaped Evergreen, but more importantly, he had confronted the demons within himself. With each mile he put between himself and the town, he felt more ready to embrace the future, carrying with him the lessons learned from his time in that enigmatic place. The morning sun bathed Evergreen in a warm, golden light as Michael drove away from the town. The road stretched out before him, seemingly endless and free of the strange loops that had previously ensnared him. He felt a profound sense of relief, believing that he had finally escaped the town's mysterious grip. The radio played a soft melody, and the engine purred smoothly, a stark contrast to the eerie silence that had enveloped Evergreen. As the miles ticked by, Michael allowed himself to relax. The weight of his past seemed lighter, his mind clearer. He glanced in the rearview mirror, watching as Evergreen became a distant speck on the horizon. The trees thinned, and the landscape opened up to rolling hills and expansive fields. He could almost forget the unsettling experiences that had plagued him in the town. But as the afternoon progressed, Michael began to notice something odd. The scenery outside his window started to shift subtly. The rolling hills gave way to dense forests, and the roads twisted in unnatural ways. He felt a flicker of unease but dismissed it as fatigue. Maybe he was just overworked and stressed from his time in Evergreen. He reached for his phone to check his progress, but the screen displayed only static. Frustration bubbled up within him. "Of course," he muttered. The GPS had long since lost signal, leaving him to navigate by memory and instinct. He decided to pull over at a small gas station he passed by. The gas station was quaint, with a faded sign that read, "Evergreen Fuel and Supplies." It looked abandoned, yet the lights inside were on, casting a faint glow through the dusty windows. Michael hesitated for a moment before stepping out of the car. The air was still, and an unsettling silence hung over the area. He approached the pump, noticing that the keypad was operational despite the station's apparent abandonment. Michael filled his tank and glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. But the station was empty, save for a solitary figure standing beneath the flickering neon sign. "Welcome back, Michael," the figure said, stepping into the light. It was Sheriff Connolly, but his expression was different, harder, colder. His eyes bore into Michael's with an intensity that sent chills down his spine. "What do you want?" Michael demanded, his voice trembling. Sheriff Connolly smiled, a twisted semblance of warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "You thought you could leave Evergreen that easily? The binding ritual isn't just about closure. It's about balance." Michael's heart pounded in his chest. "Balance? What are you talking about?" Connolly gestured toward the forest encircling the gas station. "Evergreen exists to maintain the equilibrium between our world and the others. When someone leaves, they disrupt that balance. The town needs you to stay to ensure the barrier remains intact." Michael's mind raced. "You mean I can't leave because it's necessary?" The sheriff nodded slowly. "Exactly. You fulfilled your purpose by confronting your past, but now your presence is required to sustain Evergreen's existence. Without you, the barriers could weaken, allowing things from the other side to seep through." Panic surged within Michael. "There must be another way. I've already given what I needed to give." Connolly's smile widened unnaturally. "You see, Evergreen isn't just a town. It's a living entity, drawing in souls to preserve its sanctity. Once you've been part of it, you belong here." Before Michael could react, the ground beneath him began to tremble. The sky darkened as clouds swirled ominously above, and an unnatural chill filled the air. Shadows lengthened, and ethereal figures began to emerge from the forest, their forms shifting and indistinct. "You have to choose," Connolly intoned, his voice echoing as the shadows closed in. "Stay and become part of Evergreen, or leave and risk everything unraveling." Michael looked around desperately, realizing the gravity of the situation. He had thought he had escaped, but Evergreen had a hold on him that was far deeper and more sinister than he had ever imagined. The town wasn't just a place. It was a nexus of supernatural forces, feeding off the souls of those who entered. As the shadows reached out to envelop him, Michael felt his resolve falter. He had worked so hard to find peace, only to be dragged back into the nightmare he thought he had escaped. The realization dawned on him too late. Evergreen was not a sanctuary but a trap, designed to ensnare and consume those who sought refuge within its borders. Sheriff Connolly stepped closer, his presence oppressive. "Welcome back, Michael. You're exactly where you need to be." The shadows closed in, whispering voices filling his ears with promises of eternal belonging. Michael screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness. The last thing he saw was the sheriff's unwavering gaze and the ethereal forms reaching out to claim him. As the night fell over the gas station, Evergreen continued its silent vigil, waiting patiently for the next soul to wander into its grasp. The town remained a mysterious enigma, its true nature hidden beneath layers of quaint charm and deceptive serenity, forever bound to the supernatural forces that ensured no one could ever truly leave.